Hello everyone. A very warm welcome from the APG and from our partners, The Guardian and ITV. Just like you, I'm sure, I'm excited to be here this afternoon to hear how our four great speakers have won through against the odds. I'm also delighted to be your MC for this afternoon. And actually, I didn't say this to the APG when they approached me to do this, I haven't done any MCing for many years. I didn't mention that to them when Sarah approached me, which I'm feeling rather guilty about. So I'm probably a bit rusty. So I thought I'd better brush up on how to do it. And luckily, there's actually a website out there that tells you how to MC. Honestly, there is. Whatever happened to working it out for yourself, it seems that there's a website for everything these days. Anyway, on WikiHow, the world's collaborative how-to manual, you can learn how to be an MC. Or put another way, as they do on the website, you can learn how to impress everyone with your magical charisma. That's copy with a benefit in it, all right. And of course, at that point, I was hooked. I was thinking, could I really be magical and charismatic all in one afternoon? Well, WikiHow taught me how. First piece of advice from them, don't stop when you mess up. It's encouraging, isn't it? Shame to raise that possibility, but I know what they mean. Then it gets better. They say, stare at something or think of something that makes you less nervous, they advise. And of course, I wasn't feeling nervous until I read that piece of advice. Here's another piece of advice. Apparently, an MC should smile constantly. I suspect this website originates from Have a Nice Day, America, don't you? And a way of ensuring the said constant smiling, and I quote, is to imagine in advance several happy or funny scenarios. Remember the old speech advice, imagine everyone in the crowd in their underwear. Your lightheartedness is sure to rub off. Now, it's difficult for me with my natural gloomy disposition to do that, even with the thought of your underwear, but I'll give it a go. So apologies in advance for my rictus-like grin throughout this afternoon's proceeding. It's obviously constipation. But frankly, apart from making me smile constantly, WikiHow wasn't getting me very far in understanding how to be a great MC. So my next idea was to turn to my nearest and dearest for a bit of advice. What should I say in my introduction? I asked my wife, Kate. Say nothing, she replied sternly, and a little unhelpfully, I thought. Say nothing, she went on, because the audience aren't interested in you. I really like Michael Portillo, though. He's really good on Great British Rail journeys. And look, she continued, brandishing the Guardian's The Guide in a way that I could only see as somewhat mocking. Look, you're in luck. Great British Railway Journeys is on BBC 4 on Tuesday the 14th of May at 7:30. It's the last in the series, by the way. So not getting anywhere, I turned to my son, Sam. What should I do at that Worlds Collide event I told you about, I asked. Now, quick as a flash, and with the candor that a 13-year-old son can do better than anyone else, he replied, just confess that you're only doing it to try and raise your miserably low profile. And then, as he thumbed through the program notes that you've all got in front of you, he said, isn't that the cool vicar who stood up to the police at St. Paul's? Now I was beginning to despair. Surely my partners at Crow would know what to do. No luck there either. Email reply from Barry. I've looked up Karen McCluskey on Google. What she's done with the Glasgow gangs is inspiring. Yes, I agree, Barry, but what should I do? Oh, just introduce them. Thanks. It didn't get any better with Nick and John either. They just wanted to talk about Sir John Hegarty. How, despite the fact that he's so famous in our industry, they'd never actually heard him speak or even seen him interviewed, and so we're looking forward to it. So no useful MC tips there then. Absolutely hopeless. But actually, you know what? Everyone was making the crucial and important point here in showing their disinterest in my predicament. Today's speakers are what we're all here to hear. Although look what I've managed to do in the last few minutes is talk about myself, which is a tremendous achievement, I think. I'm only here to help you get as much as possible out of today's event. And it's difficult to know how I might do that, but I'm going to try. I guess some MCs might do the provoking thing like Paxman. Though today, surely there's at least one agent provocateur amongst the speakers. Dr. Giles Fraser is your man. I've been getting into his loose cannon column in Saturday's Guardian for a weekly dose of provocation, and I really recommend that you do too. Nor is it likely that I'll have to do the Jeremy Kyle style thing if it kicks up off here. I think I'll leave that to the woman who's faced down the Glasgow gangs. That's Karen McCluskey, of course. And if you like your conference events convivial, well, Sir John has got that covered with his very own Hegarty Shaman's vintage, complete with the black sheep logo branding that's followed John around. And I'm sure he's brought some to try for us, because if he didn't do that, that would just be, well, rude. But maybe one way I can help is by asking the questions that would be just too stupid to ask out loud, so that at the end of the day, you can ask important and serious ones from the floor. For example, a stupid question I'd like to put to the Right Honourable Michael Portillo would be, how is it possible to squeeze onto those impossibly small sofas on the set of the BBC's This Week? Catch it late on Thursday evenings and you'll see what I mean. Come on, I know that some of you are burning to ask that one. Okay, I'm prepared to accept that it might be only me who's preoccupied by that particular stupid question, because I currently spend most of my waking hours working with DFS and their surprisingly large sofas. Or maybe, instead of doing any of these things, I could just spend the afternoon tweeting using hashtag APG Worlds Collide, if I knew how to do that, of course. Anyway, enough of me. No, really. I'd like to invite our first speaker to the podium, Dr. Giles Fraser. Dr. Giles Fraser is priest in charge at St Mary's Newington in South London and the former Canon Chancellor of St Paul's Cathedral. But of course he's famous or infamous, depending on your point of view, for resigning from this post during the Occupy protest. I didn't say the protesters are welcome to camp, he has said previously, but I couldn't countenance the idea that we'd have a Dale farm on the steps of the church. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Giles Fraser.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm not going to talk about that at all, actually. I'm going to talk about something entirely different, and a story that has shaped my reaction to this question, how do you win against all the odds? In 2005, I was asked by The Guardian to go to Gaza to go and write a story about kids playing football in Gaza. And I don't know if you remember 2005, it was when the Greeks won the European Football Championship. I think it was the last thing they must have ever won, poor Greeks. But that was the year that they won. And I went into the mid-part and southern part of Gaza to go and play football with the kids and to talk about them, about their lives. And at one point in the middle of a game of football, they said, come and see where we used to live, where the Israelis have knocked our houses down. So perhaps slightly naively, I followed them to a part of a town called Rafah, which is on the southern part of the Gaza Strip, up against the Philadelphia border, the border with Egypt. And we walked out into this great lunar pile of rubble, me and about 6 kids of about 10, and all of a sudden a machine gun opened up from the Israeli side, and a hail of bullets came down, missing me by about 1.5 feet. At the time, I was the vicar of Putney, and if you know Putney, this sort of stuff doesn't happen in Putney. It was the first time I'd been shot at, and the last. And I ran when it happened. All the kids ran. We ran and hid behind a local house just around the corner, absolutely crapping myself, I have to say. It was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. And a woman, I remember distinctly, a woman hanging out her washing as I was hiding behind her house. I mean, she'd just seen it all before. It was nothing to her. I came back from Gaza and was increasingly fascinated by my lack of courage in the face of those bullets, and the fact that there were people who work every day in that sort of a context and have courage. And I started to find myself in those bits of bookshops that say military history and things like that, where you have sort of men in leather gloves with bald heads buying books. And that's what it seemed to me anyway. And I picked up a terrible book about people who won the VC by Peter de la Billière, who used to sort of run the SAS. And it was about courage, called Supreme Courage. And this is what I was interested in. How do you really get the courage in those sorts of situations? And anyway, his idea was, and a quote from him is that certain people have a certain amount of courage, but you can boost your courage with 4 things. And these are the 4 things. They're not from me, they're from him. He says, training, discipline, patriotism, and faith. They were the 4 things that he thought could boost your own courage. So always looking to pick things up like a magpie for Thought for the Day, I did a Thought for the Day on this very subject, and on people winning VCs and what courage was and the like. And a couple of days after, I got a phone call from the army for a nice chap saying, we'd like you to come and be a lecturer at Shrivenham, which is the Defence Academy, and teach our majors who are about to go off to Iraq then and Afghanistan about leadership and ethics. And I just said, fine, I'll definitely come, and was faced with the most intimidating lecture hall I've ever seen in my life, which is it was bigger than this, with more people all sitting bolt upright, all in uniform, and just like all I'd ever seen in action was a few bullets in Gaza. But this is where I started to get very engaged with the army and with what it takes to be a soldier on the battlefield. And it's an obsession that I've had since then and done quite a bit of work on it. And the question that I've been interested in is, how do you do the right thing when bullets are flying around your feet? How do you do the right thing when you're incredibly confused and you don't know what's going on? And the modern battlefield is one of the most confusing environments you can imagine. You don't know who's in uniform. You don't know people are not in uniform. Children could be firing at you. You don't actually know if someone's standing there on a mobile phone, whether they're going, "Hi, Mum, I'll be late home for tea," or whether they'll be going, move the mortar 3 degrees to the right. You have to make very, very quick and very major moral decisions to shoot or not to shoot. And my teaching, I used to teach at Oxford, I used to teach ethics at Oxford, and I was asked to come and teach ethics in this environment. And it's very interesting when you start thinking about the sorts of moral decisions that people would have to make on the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan. Because the normal, and this is going to get technical for about 2 or 3 minutes, but the normal philosophical, ethical systems actually don't work so well. Generally speaking, there's 2 sorts of forms of ethics. One is called consequentialism, and one is called deontology. Consequentialism basically means an action is right if it has the right consequences, if it goes on to have good consequences. Utilitarianism is the most famous consequentialist theory. An action is good if it produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Now, the problem is, if you're on the battlefield, you don't actually know what the consequences of your action are ever really going to be. There's so many different possibilities that are going to come about after what you do. It's very, very difficult to know what you do. And though I could talk about it for quite a long time, utilitarianism is a bad moral theory for the battlefield. What most people think that you abide by as a soldier is what's called deontological ethics, which is rule-based ethics, which is basically just a list of rules. Thou shalt not is basically the understanding that you have in deontological ethics of what a moral formula looks like. And these poor bloody soldiers go round with an enormous great big rule book about what they can and cannot do. I once was talking to the lawyers on the stage at Shrivenham, and I asked them whether they knew all of the law of armed combat and the human rights legislation that applied to how you behave on the battlefield. And they said even they didn't know it all. The truth of the matter is, you think you can start with a few rules about how to behave, but when situations become more confusing, you need more rules to cover it. So, for instance, there's not 10 commandments in the Bible. You might start with 10 commandments, but actually there's 613 commandments in the Old Testament, and that's because you find another situation, you need another rule. You need another situation, you need another rule. And with the people on the battlefield, there are hundreds and hundreds of rules. And that's actually very difficult. So you're about to shoot at somebody. You're about to make a very important moral decision. You don't have time to look it up in the book. You don't have time to reflect hard about whether this is subsection 4 paragraph 5 of the whatever. You're actually on your own. So how do you do the right thing on the battlefield if these moral theories don't work? There's a great story about a man who went, a sergeant who went spare on the battle, American, and he lost it, completely lost it. And he was just about to murder some of his captives. And a soldier came up to him and he said 4 words that completely stopped him. 4 words that stopped him in his tracks. These have been actually rather important to me in understanding quite a lot about the church, in fact. The 4 words were not, look it up at the back of the book or look it up in the rule book, or they were, Marines don't do that. The 4 words that stopped him were, Marines don't do that. And why did they stop him? They stopped him because the word Marines had come to mean something. There was a whole world of associations, pride in your regiment, in the stories that had been told, in the pictures on the wall. You built that word up to mean something. And there was an identification with what it was to be that sort of a person. And the Americans have developed, and we have latterly as well, a very, very interesting way of thinking about ethics on the battlefield, which is that it's not about what you do so much, and here's the crucial point, but it's about who you are. That ethics is actually more about who you are as a person, primarily, rather than what you do. It's in technical language, it's called virtue ethics. And the interesting thing about virtue ethics is that it focuses on, as it were, being a good person. Why is this important? Because this being the right person approximates to the right decision. When you can make them, you have to make them instantly. You grow out of who you are. The right decision grows instinctively out of who you are if you're the right sort of person. So when you're training soldiers, it's not about memorizing the rules. It's about developing them as certain sorts of characters. This is absolutely crucial. So the people who do the right thing are the people who are certain sorts of people. Good characters. Then the question becomes, how do you become this sort of person? And Peter Dillbilly was right about this. Training. Why do you strip a Bren gun 50 times when you're being fired upon on the training field? Why do you do these boring drills? You can do it so you can do it when you're being fired upon as well. And the same is actually true about doing the right thing, making the right decisions. You rehearse it. You rehearse being the person you want to be. You may not think you are that person. You may think you're frightened. You may think that you'd run away. But if you rehearse being the person you want to be, then you will end up being much, much more likely to act in that way. Alcoholics Anonymous have got this brilliant phrase I absolutely love, and I think it's dead right. And they say, fake it till you make it. Fake it till you make it. Which is to say, you walk in the shoes of the person you want to become, and you'll end up becoming much more like that person. So my answer to this question, how do you win against all the odds? When bullets are flying around, how do you do the right thing? How do you do what is right? And that's what I'm going to mean by winning here. How do you do what's right in a very confusing, fast-moving environment where things are flying around all over the place? The answer to the question is you train yourself to be the right person. You actually develop your character in such a way through practice, through repetition, through even faking it, faking being that person, and you'll end up being that person. That's what I've learned from the army, and actually it's much more profound than it thinks. We think that we often act out of some inner nature, and this expresses itself publicly. But actually, you can train who you are, you can change who you are, and you change who you are through a constant rehearsal of this person that you want to be. How do you win against all the odds? You prepare to win against all the odds. You train to win against all the odds. You be the person, you train to be the person that you want to be, even if that means that you fake it until you make it. That's what I understood. And this is one last comment about the Occupy thing. One of the things that people ask me all the time, and people who disagree about my decision to resign, but was it a difficult decision to resign? The answer is absolutely not, because in a sense you had rehearsed who you were to such an extent that it was very clear when that situation comes, and it's confusing, and there's newspapers, and there's television cameras all over you, that actually you rehearse a particular sort of what you want to be, then you can much more instinctively act out of that. And that, I think, is how you win against all the odds. Thank you very much.